All right, sorry for the late start. I had a few things that I wanted to set up and didn't have enough time to do it, but I think we're all good to go now. We'll find out. Before we start on the summary or discussion, I wanted to mention an email that I sent out to the graduate students. So if you're an undergraduate student, you can take a quick nap. But the graduate students have sent out a quick poll regarding the 3MT competition. You will likely be receiving an email with more details about that later today. Please respond to that if you haven't. First of all, I'm not collecting names on that, so I'm not going to hold you to it. I'm just trying to get an estimate of how many people want to participate so I can report that to the coordinator. If it doesn't work out, that's fine, but I would just like to get an understanding of that and figure out how I can report that. But please let me know so I can report that, and then we'll be ready to go. Okay, now with the business out of the way, let's talk fun. And when I say fun, I mean a $54 million fraud. So isn't that fun, guys? Yeah. So this is about all the Queen sources, which those of you who had auditing with me, which is most of the people in this room, remember we talked about this case from an auditing perspective. I'm not going to touch too much on the auditing stuff. There was some details in the case, and the auditors did a bad job. Let's just go ahead and get that out of the way. But I wanted to talk more about the fraud aspects because this is a fascinating case. If you did a little bit of a summary on this, and I decided to use an AI tool just to see what kind of summary it would come up with. So here's what I came up with when I asked ChatGPT. It says Rita Crunwell carried out one of the largest municipal frauds in U.S. history. Now, I do want to clarify that that's probably a misnomer because to date it is still the largest U.S. or municipal fraud in U.S. history. And embezzling approximately $53.7 million from the city of Dixon, Illinois, which I made a note here that its population is around 16,000, so right around the size of Kirksville, Missouri. She stole $54 million from a city the size of Kirksville, Missouri. Again, you'll hear me say this a lot, but when something like that happens, I almost don't want to get mad. I just want to be just like, good job. Yeah, I don't know how you pulled that off. But that's amazing. So she did it over 2 decades, starting in 91 into 2012. She exploited her trust position in the city government to siphon public funds into a secret bank account, using the money to primarily finance an elite quarter horse breeding and showing operation. The fraud was uncovered in 2012 and ultimately led to conviction, imprisonment, and extensive asset forfeiture. So not a bad summary. If you used an AI tool for that particular question, then you probably came up with something very similar to that. I'm not saying that you have to use AI tools for this. This is a pretty easy summary if you watch the video, but I just was curious what kind of detail it came up with. Interesting to note that some of the information that was in the AI tool was inconsistent or incorrect. So first of all, it says one of the largest frauds, which I guess is kind of correct. It's still the largest fraud. I actually did a check on this to make sure that was the case, and it's still pretty sizable, even though it's 13 years old. The fraud says take place from 1990 to 2012. That's what the AI tool says. It's actually the fraud started in 91. So if you are going to use AI tool, what is the golden rule on this? Check the detail to make sure it's correct. You don't just blankly copy and paste, because if I see something that's inconsistent, I say, did you use AI for this? And if so, why didn't you correct it? Okay. Will that cost you points? Yes, it will. Okay. So please make sure that you're consistent about that. I will be checking that. All right. So yeah, that's a summary of the case. Now, obviously, there's a lot more detail with that. As with the case with any fraud, especially when it's a close-knit community like this, there's a lot of betrayal, a lot of lost trust. And if you watch the video part where they were talking, I mean, I know everybody watched the video, but if you kind of focused on the discussion when they were having the city council meeting, there's a lot of really angry people, a lot of angry people. It says, what is that one guy who was saying? It says, as far as I'm concerned, you all are fired. Thank you very much. And it's like, yeah. So I got to imagine if you've ever watched the city council meetings here in Kirksville, Missouri, there are a lot of very, very quick people to temper here. In a small community, I think that's just very natural, because when something good happens, everybody's going to share in it. When something bad happens, then it's somebody you know, somebody that you count on, not just Rita Crunwell specifically, but the individuals who are running the city council and running the office. So that was something that was very, very profound, is that the people who were guilty of betrayal of trust wasn't just Rita Crunwell, but the people who should have been doing a better job. And we're going to get a little bit more into that, but let's go ahead and talk about what you should have identified for the financial impact of the fraud. Now, at the baseline, what was the financial impact? 54 million, or 53.7 million if you're being specific. Somebody came to 53,694,212. I don't know what the exact dollar amounts. I don't think they do, but it was approximately 53.7 million. There was an interesting statistic in the video. According to the video, About how much was that per citizen in Dixon, Illinois? Yeah, $3,300, 13 and 50 cents. So basically, Rita basically went up to every single person in Illinois over a 20-year period and said, I'm taking $3,000. Thank you very much. Now, you may say, well, that was 20-year period, and that breaks down to only a few $100s. Still, I mean, if you had somebody that says, okay, I'm taking $200 out of your wallet every month, every year, would you be satisfied with that? You'd probably be a little bit annoyed. And interestingly enough, this is kind of something we're going to see, especially with embezzlement. How did this start out? It was in 1991, and they talked about what this impact of the fraud was in 1991. Did anybody pick that number up? $181,000 in 1991. All right. Now, if you do the math, $181,000 times 20 years does not equal 53.7 million. She started out small and she got increasingly larger over time. Now, let's talk about the intuition behind that, because this is a really important concept to understand with respect to embezzlement. Why do you think this occurs? Why do you think this occurred? And why do you think this occurs frequently? So if you are a fraudster, are you going to start out with massive amounts of money early on? Or are you going to say, I'm just going to take a little bit right now and see if I can get away with it? I mean, maybe you're not even thinking about that. You're just like, I just need enough to get by on. So let's say you've got a gambling addiction. Let's say everybody in this room has a massive gambling addiction, okay? And you're going to steal from your employer. Your first inclination is, I just need enough money. I'm going to pay it back immediately, right? Okay, that's the rationalization, which we'll get to that. Okay, that's the rationalization. But the idea being is that you're just going to start out small, and that is going to be a one-time event. And then you steal the money, and what happens? Nothing. Okay. Now, if you are a fraudster, does that give you confidence? Say, hey, nobody paid any attention. I stole $180,000 and nobody said a word. I probably could steal $250,000 next year. And it escalates and self-perpetuates. Okay. Now, there's two key aspects to that. First of all, there's the escalation of the fraudulent amounts. If you steal a little bit early on, then it's going to increase over time. And she was very brazen at the end. Okay. If you look at the highest amount was culminating at 5.8 million in 2008. Now, it was not the end of the fraud, but that was the most she stole in a given year. What else was going on in 2008? Something I like to talk about in all of my classes. Yeah, the financial meltdown, the housing market, and basically the world, the recession that was going on, the global financial recession. So she stole $6 million during a recession. All right. Again, well done, it's like that. So yeah, that's the case. But she was increasing and getting ever brazen. So we know that there's the escalation. But what about self-perpetuation? How likely is it, if you're in a position of financial stress, that you're going to steal one time and just basically say, that's it? That would be the optimal scenario, okay? This is something that Joseph Wells actually said in response to one of my questions. So Joseph Wells is the founder of the American Certified Fraud Examiners Institute, the ACFE, the group that I encourage you guys to be members of if you want to pursue a career in this area. But he was actually at OU during my time there, and during a presentation, I said, what is the perfect fraud? And he said, I would take $100,000 in cash, I would bury it and wait for the statute of limitations to run out, and then I'd bury it. That's the perfect fraud right there, stealing something one time, and that's it. All right. But that's not something that a fraudster will naturally do. A fraudster will say, all right, I'm in a period of financial stress. I'm going to fix this stress in the future. What is the likelihood of that stress being fixed? We're going to see this a lot. We're going to see frauds that actually create more stress in the future. So you have to increase the amount of fraud that you have to continue on with. That's something that we're going to see next week when we talk about WorldCom. WorldCom was basically saying, okay, we're just trying to get over this one hurdle. Well, they kept creating higher hurdles for themselves, and they had to increase the amount of fraud. So this is something that's very consistent with frauds, any type of fraud. If we're talking about frauds that are embezzlement, we're talking about frauds that are financial reporting frauds. To some extent, we could even say that occurs for bribery and corruption, because if you're going to be bribing, people are going to say, oh, you have all this money, you can pay me more. So any type of fraud is going to be subject to this. It's not going to be 100% of the frauds, but I would say a majority of fraud by far. Is there anything else that we need to consider with financial impact? Is it just the 53.7 million? This is something I want you to consider for future cases as well. So we could say the baseline is $53.7 million, but is that always just the impact of the fraud? So what did I tell you all? What did I tell you about investigations on Tuesday when I was saying I had an investigation in Denver? What was the financial impact of that fraud? Does anybody remember? It's $2,000. Okay. What was the cost of the investigation? $20,000. Okay. So there's going to be additional costs that are incurred whenever a fraud occurs. There's the FBI investigation, which are going to be government funds. There was the lawyers. They actually gave a figure on the lawyer costs. If you watch that in the video, it was $10 million for lawyer fees for this investigation. So there's going to be additional costs there. And even if we don't think about monetary costs, we're going to be considering what are the additional costs that are not necessarily quantifiable. One of those you could say is the infrastructure that was kind of decaying and crumbling around them because they had nothing to hold up, but also just the trust of the people in Dixon, Illinois, who are basically going to be scarred for life on this. It's very interesting. We're going to see a clip from the video that I was talking about, Scam Goddess, which is another documentary about this. It's a little bit shorter, but I definitely like Kelly Richmond Pope's video, the one that you all watched, a little bit more. The other one's a little bit dramatized. It was made for Hulu, and so it's very good, but I think it kind of doesn't lean on the details nearly as much. But in that video, basically when she walks into town and she's meeting people, it says, "So what do you know about Rita Crunwell?" And the room just goes deathly silent. Okay. Everybody hates this woman. All right. And for good reason. I think that there's an argument for that, very passionate reasons. So there were some definite red flags that were identified. And by the way, when I use the term red flag, let's just go ahead and start from a layperson perspective. I think everybody kind of knows vernacular red flag. That term has been used before. If you wave a red flag, is that a signal of a good thing or a bad thing? It's a bad thing, okay? So red flag is basically an indicator of possible fraud. So we're going to talk a lot about red flags over the course of the semester. When we say red flag, we're saying this should have been a signal that something bad is going on. So what was one of the big signals? They talked about a letter that was sent out during the scandal. Does anybody remember the letter? Where did it come from? Sterling, yeah, Sterling's controller, okay? He said, "I'm not sure how you all are running a $20 million deficit when we're in the black, when we're generating a profit. We have money to spare. This doesn't make sense. We're basically the same city. So how are you all losing money and not having money for the infrastructure?" So there was an argument in the video that says, how did somebody in another city know there was a fraud going on when our own administrators, our own people who were supposed to be in charge, had no clue? That was kind of a big red flag. What was another big red flag? Kind of a general red flag. So Kelly Richmond Pote, the narrator and the one who created the documentary, she actually said this was not necessarily a red flag, but come on, it was a red flag.
Taking 4 months off of you.
So I want to talk about that. That would not be a red flag, but that was something they actually leaned on and they talked about that. Okay. But it was something that was not necessarily a red flag. And I would say that's not a red flag, but the one that's specifically referred to as not necessarily a red flag had to do with her wealth. Okay. And she kind of justified that and says, well, my parents invested in Campbell Soup and said they had a lot of ranching area. Said that was not necessarily a red flag, but let's be honest, it was a red flag. Okay, a lavish lifestyle. She basically was buying all these things, and she owned a ranch with 400 show horses. So, by the way, quarter horses, is that an expensive hobby or a cheap hobby? Does anybody own 400 show horses? Like, anybody own a ranch? Anybody own a ranch? No, me neither. I don't know why I'm raising my hand. It's not personally interesting, and if I did, I would have to do more than be a professor at Truman State to afford that. Okay. So yeah, very, very expensive hobby. And they were talking about like during the recession, how she bought like a $2.1 million mobile home so she could travel to these events, and that she also bought a brand new trailer for her horses. And it's just like, okay, well, yeah, tighten the buckle and make sure everything is going well with the city. But I've got plenty of money. I'm flush. And it's like, yeah, didn't put two and two together there. That was the case. All right, identification of fraud risk factors. Now I want to reiterate these. Okay, so I probably should. Let's see if I've got this diagram somewhere. I don't think I have it in forensics, which is kind of ironic, but we could probably have it in another course. So let's go ahead and check auditing. Do I have fraud triangle? No, I don't have fraud triangle. Okay, so yeah, my bad. Let's go ahead and take a look and see if we can find it on Google. We're just going to do everything. We're going to Google fraud triangle. Now, I realize that most of you already know what the fraud triangle is. This is why we're looking at this, Dr. Barnes, but let's go ahead and start at basics. So this starts from something called Cressy's hypothesis, where he basically identified there were 3 factors that led to fraud. And this was kind of consolidated into something called the fraud triangle, which is pressure, opportunity, and rationalization. These are the traditional 3 fraud risk factors that occur in every fraud. Now, what do we know about this already? If you eliminate a risk factor, what happens? The fraud goes away. It's very, very difficult for a fraud to occur if the fraud is happening. Now, as we've already talked about in other courses, what is the one that we generally kind of focus on as accountants and investigators? Pressure, opportunity, or rationalization? Opportunity. You can't affect somebody's internal pressure. If somebody's got a gambling addiction, you could say, well, you shouldn't have a gambling addiction. It's like, yes, thank you very much. Okay. That's why they call it an addiction. You can't affect somebody's rationalization. If somebody's going to commit fraud, you can't say bad. Don't do that. All right. Can you affect opportunity? Yes. And that's going to be one of the focuses of this course is like, what were the opportunities and what should have been stopped? Okay. So let's go ahead and talk about pressure and opportunity and then rationalization. So pressure, what was the obvious pressure that was here for Rita? She had a ranch, quarter horse ranch, 400 show horses. And obviously, if you're going to be traveling around, you need a really, really nice recreational vehicle to be able to travel around in. I mean, it's just obvious, okay? If you're going to take 4 months out of the year, 4 months off out of the year to go show horses, you have to have someplace nice to stay. Because let's be honest, she's a world champion. She deserves this, okay? That's actually getting a rationalization. But yeah, pressure is going to be that there was a big financial impact from maintaining her lifestyle and maintaining the ranch that she had. What about the opportunity? What would be the key opportunity identification in this one? There's actually a lot of them we can break down, but there's a pretty easy one that we can identify. Segregation of duties. Okay, for those of you who have never heard this term, that's going to be one that you're going to hear a lot in this course. Okay, so those of you who have had 5 courses with me are going to be saying, yes, I know, Dr. Barnes, you say this in every course. Okay, those of you who have not had me in a course before, you probably want to make a note of this because this is a pretty critical one. So the Institute of Internal Auditors says that in every single financial role of an organization, there should be 3 responsibilities that have to be separated out. Now, let's say them off with me. Custody, authorization, and recording. Okay, CAR, custody, authorization, and recording. Now, we're not going to get into detail about that today. We may look at that in more detail, but how much segregation of duties was there in the financial role at Dixon, Illinois? 0. There was no segregation of duties going on. Rita controlled everything. Rita controlled everything. She was the one who was responsible for the custody of the transaction of the finances. So she basically received all cash and deposited all cash. She was the one who authorized the transactions that needed to be recorded or needed to be conducted. And then she recorded those transactions and basically transferred all the details between not just the bank, but also the paperwork that occurred. So basically, she was a whirling dervish of activity that took care of everything. Now, the people at Dixon, Illinois, if you kind of hear it, it's like, yeah, she handled everything. She was amazing. She was just wonderful. Like in retrospect, they're kind of like, okay, I see why she handled everything now. And so, yeah, that was kind of a big concern is the lack of segregation of duties. So I think that's a key opportunity. There's probably a lot of other opportunities we identified. The lack of scrutiny, a lack of supervision on the part of the city council or the main office, like the mayor, then not any reconciliation or review of her work. So let's talk really quickly about that because this is going to come up multiple times. When we talk about segregation of duties is really important if possible. Is it always possible? If you have a small organization, it's not necessarily possible. So if that's the case, what do the people who are supervising the work need to do? They need to review it for make sure that it's correct and it's proper. Now, there was no review of Rita's work. They just trusted her to do the job. And so even if we say the segregation duty is not possible because it was too small a city administration to have proper segregation duties, and we know that's not the case because in the video, they talk about the new personnel who took over, the lady who took over Rita's role, and her first thing was separate responsibilities, okay? So we know there was proper segregation of duties that was possible, but even if it was not possible, there should have been some supervision and some review of her work, okay? So that's something to characterize. Now, we're going to talk a little bit more about that because that actually leads to something that was said in the video, but let's talk really quickly about rationalization, okay? What is the rationalization in this case? I've got one image for you. This is an image from the video right there, okay? Can we actually say that's rationalization right there? Yeah, I think that's a pretty easy rationalization. That's Queen Rita right there. Yeah, it's good to be the queen. And so, yeah, all the queen's horses. So, I mean, this is, I don't know, this is everything that I would say. If I saw this image just kind of standalone and not knew what the context of it was, I said, yeah, that's not a good person right there. Yeah. That's just somebody who's trying to get away with something right there. Yeah. Queen Rita, basically the one who was in charge and had all the power of finances in there, basically says, I have the power, I can do what I want. Is that a rationalization? Yeah, that's a pretty easy rationalization. Now, are there other more subtle, distinct rationalizations? I think so. We could probably break those down. Very interestingly enough, I think that the rationalization threshold, based on just her actions and based on her activity, I think the rationalization threshold just disappeared over time. And, that's kind of where we see the brazen thievery of $5.8 million in a single year. I mean, you have to have a very low rationalization threshold to steal that amount of money from a small city to actually basically say, well, we're going to have to issue debt because, well, I need a new trailer. Let's be honest. So Dixon, Illinois. So yeah, the rationalization threshold I think was very, very minor at the end, but there still had to be some rationalization, and it's basically say, I control everything, I can do what I want. Yeah. So primary lessons learned from this case. What do we have? What are some lessons? Okay. I think my big ones, this is actually in caps and with 3 exclamation points. I think it's really important. 3 words with the initials SOD. What is that going to be? Segregation of duties. Now we're going to see that a lot, but I think this is a pretty easy one. This is the one that if there had been some segregation of duties, some actions there, that this would have been pretty easy. But what are some other ones here? So I said we we're going to talk about the auditors specifically, but I do want to talk about whether or not the auditors were accountable. And so they talked about Clifton Larson Allen. And by the way, I've had auditing courses in the past where I actually had students who were taking job offers with CLA, and I said it's not CLA's fault. I mean, or it is CLA's fault, but they're not the only ones who have done this. Every single accounting firm has had something like this. So I'm not picking specifically on CLA, but I'm going to talk about just auditors in general. If the auditors don't provide due diligence, then they are going to be held accountable, and they should be held accountable. And so this is going to be something we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about over the course of the semester is who are the parties that should be held accountable in this. And oftentimes auditors are going to be held massively accountable simply because, first of all, they know better. Secondly, they have a lot of liquid assets. So if you notice the breakdown, Clifton Larson Allen had to pay like $38 million, and so they paid for a majority of the fraud penalties. Who else was held accountable? What other party was held accountable for a significant amount of the assets that were trying to be recovered? I mean, obviously Rita, but the bank, yes, Fifth Third Bank, which is a weird name, by the way. I got curious about the origin of that name. But the bank should consistently monitor and review all bank account activity. I think there was an interesting debrief with the lawyer who was suing on behalf of the city, who talked about Fifth Third Bank and talking about, all right, if you receive a a check that's hundreds of thousands of dollars, and it's written to treasurer as the payee, could you negotiate that check? And it's like, no, we can't negotiate the check. And he said, but you did. All right, you did negotiate checks like that. So what's going on? It's like, well, it was Rita. Rita, let's be honest, Rita's the treasurer, so we knew who it was. It was completely legit, except it was completely not legit. So yeah, that was the case. The bank should be held responsible there, and that was one of the concerns. Yes.
Who was the third party there was like a card company that held it?
Yeah, I honestly don't know because they didn't really talk too much about it, but I saw that in the video, and they didn't really go into the role there. I think that may have had to do with electronic transactions that Rita engaged in. So if we're talking about electronic transactions like credit card companies and electronic medium companies, they have a responsibility to monitor those. It's interesting because I think maybe several of us have encountered that. I actually encountered it over Christmas break. While I was sick with COVID, one of my credit card companies said, hey, it looks like there's a fraudulent transaction, and indeed there was. They actually have a responsibility to be accountable for those. If they don't, then they can be penalized. They can be held accountable for the transactions. So I think this actually has to the Payment Card Services Act, or Payment Card Industry, PCI, had to do with their responsibilities under those rules there, and they just didn't meet those requirements. But as far as the actual details, I don't know. That would be something that would have to drill down a little bit further because it was outside of the scope of any of the reading that I did. So I made some other notes here that I want to talk really quickly about. And by the way, as you're going through this, you're not responsible for providing other notes or providing any information outside of the scope of the case, but I would strongly, strongly encourage you to get in the habit of doing additional research, particularly for next week and the week after. We're going to be talking about WorldCom next week, and the WorldCom video is about 20 minutes, but it's not comprehensive. There's a lot of detail associated with that. I'm not saying you have to drill down a lot, but there's a lot to uncover there. And interestingly enough, I think WorldCom is less pronounced because it occurred right after one of the most well-known frauds in all of human history, Enron. It occurred about a year after Enron, and everybody's like saying, "Oh, WorldCom's just another Enron. We're over it by now." WorldCom is fascinating, and there's a lot to uncover there. So I would encourage you to go just beyond the video to try to get to that. That being said, you're not accountable or responsible for that, but it's just something to learn a little bit more about the nature of the business. And I'll share some of these findings with you. Also, FIFA, we're going to be talking about FIFA. The FIFA video is very contained to just the Australian view because it's actually a whistleblower complaint from the Australian bidding process. There is a whole lot to uncover with the FIFA bids from 2018, 2020. Talk about a scandal. I mean, Sepp Blatter, not a good person. Not a good person. If you've never heard that name, you should look into it because yeah, that guy's a piece of work. Piece of something anyway. All right, yeah. Anyway, we talked about the municipal fraud. It's the largest municipal fraud. Something that Kelly Richmond Post said at the very beginning of the video is that government entities are the second most frequent victims of embezzlement. All right. So does anybody want to guess what the first victim? I actually looked this up in this resource that's used to cite this. So it's small to medium businesses. Small to medium businesses are the most frequent victim of embezzlement. Okay. And then third, anybody guess what third is? This is one I've talked about many times in other courses. Not-for-profit profits and charities. Not-for-profits and charities. What do these entities all have in common in general? Usually, sorry, go ahead.
Lack of manpower.
Yeah, lack of manpower, usually minimal infrastructure, okay? So it's hard to maintain proper segregation of duties if you do not have the individuals to maintain that, especially if we're talking about NFPs and charities and small businesses. If you're a business that operates with two people, how can you maintain segregation of duties between three people? The answer is you can't, okay? So if one partner is stealing from the other, then that's going to be a problem. So yeah, that's something that we need to be very, very heavy in scrutiny about. And there does need to be some sort of review of the processes to make sure that that takes place. Something Jake mentioned, and I want to bring this up, has to do with about the RETA taking 4 months off per year. Now, in frauds, particularly embezzlements, how common is it for a fraudster to take significant time off? No, it's not common at all. Why is that the case? Yeah, if they leave, then it's like, okay, somebody else has got to do my tasks, and they may figure out what's going on. In fact, that's actually what happened. Is that Rita's assistant had to actually get the bank reconciliations done. She said, just send me all the bank reconciliations. Because Rita had said, if you're going to do it, request the bank reconciliation specific, the accounts that you want. And she said, I just don't have time, so I'm going to request them all. And then it's like, wow, this is an account I've never seen before. Yeah. So yeah, that's something that we see. It's very, very casual. Now, there's a couple of implications of this. First of all, that just shows the confidence and brazenness of Rita Crunwell. It's like saying, well, I can take 4 months off and nobody's going to find this. They're just going to trust everything I'm doing. It's like, wow, you are arrogant. And yeah. So, but there's also the important point to note is like if you take time off, there's a risk. And they talked about that in the case that she said, don't do my work. I'll do it when I get back, which is a really, really crazy thing for somebody to say to people and them not to say, wonder what she's up to. I would be skeptical. I'd be like, if I don't know, if Dr. Caden says, don't do my work, I'll do it when I get back. I said, okay, who's she stealing from? Okay. Answer is probably nobody. And I wouldn't want to do her work anyway, because it's probably tax or administration stuff. So, but I would still question that. I'd still be very, very questionable. So the answer is that this is one of those ones that is probably why they didn't assume fraud was going on, because she's like, well, she takes time off. She can't commit fraud if she's taking a third of the month or a third of the year off every year. There's just no way that's possible. Yeah. It's like the opposite of a red flag. It's really, really strange. Yeah. So interesting enough, so we're going to be talking real quick. I want to mention this. Did anybody watch the end of the video, or when you were done, you're just like, ah, it was an hour and 20 minutes and I'll never get back? Or did anybody watch the end of the video and statistics that were at the end? So some fascinating statistics at the end. I took notes on these, okay? So it talks about fraud accounting for business failures. What was the percentage? Did anybody catch that? 30 to 50% of all business failures are accountable to fraud. That's pretty important and underlies the importance of what we're doing in here. How many percentage of companies are affected by fraud? 75% of companies. Okay. I actually thought that number would be higher, believe it or not. Okay. Median loss for government entities is $48 million, $47.5 million, $47.5 million. Now, this is not just embezzlement, but this is not just embezzlement, but any type of fraud. We do know that financial reporting fraud is significantly larger in general than embezzlement. I know you're saying $54 million. We're going to be talking about billion-dollar fraud next week. So, or billions of dollars of fraud next week. Um, of the embezzlement cases that occurred with federal funds, 69% of them occurred in companies with fewer than 500 people. So small entities, that's kind of consistent with what we talked about. All right, average prison sentence for somebody who commits fraud. How many years do you think it is? It's lower than 10.
8,
It's lower than 8.
4.
4 years, exactly 4 years. Does that just make you angry? Like somebody steals millions of dollars, like, okay, they're going to spend 4 years in prison. We're going to get to that. There's some interesting stuff about Rita Crenwell's prison sentence. Yeah, and then just as a side note, I don't know, I'm not going to read into this too much, but nearly 50% of the incidents involve female perpetrators. Okay, that was the last one, and just one to note. So, last thing I want to talk about before we kind of wrap up here. So, Rita was originally sentenced to 19 and a half years in prison starting on February 2013. So she should still be in prison right now, which kind of leads to that. I think I'm going to postpone. All right. So I'm going to allude to that. Now you can probably read about here. Actually, it's not visible on the screen. If you read the Wikipedia article, it talks a little bit about this. So Rita is not currently in prison. Okay. She actually had her sentence commuted in 2021 by President Biden under the CARES Act. Okay. So now, when I say commuted, basically what that means is that it was basically reclassified as home incarceration. Now, does that make you angry? Does that make you anybody hot on the collar? Says I don't get. I'm very dispassionate, Dr. Barnes. I don't get upset about this. How do you think the people of Dixon, Illinois felt about this? A little bit sore. Hold my beer. Okay, I'm about to go a little bit deeper. Now, on December 12th, 2024, guess what exiting President Biden did? He completely pardoned Rita Crundwell. Okay. It completely pardoned. Now, this was part of a mass pardoning of about, I think, 1,200 individuals. I don't remember the exact number, but completely commuted on December 12th, 2024, which is pretty common for a president to do, to commute or to not commute, to pardon. But the reason behind that was basically for the rationalization behind the commuting, and I use rationalization as sardonically, is that basically, he said that this is basically shown that people who are committed to reform and rehabilitate. So Rita Crundwell has shown a willingness to reform and rehabilitate after her past actions. So yeah, she is now pardoned. She is now living free and clear. And so now, how many people are upset about that? I don't usually get upset about stuff like this, but I'm a little bit annoyed by that. That makes me a little bit unhappy. So yeah, and this is something that's fairly recent, but the Scam Goddess video I think was actually a few years ago, and there were some news organizations after the commuting of the sentence. So when Rita Crundwell was in house incarceration, supposedly she was living on her brother's ranch, and there's actually a whole other can of worms that we could actually get into there, saying how do family members benefit? Because I think that was a don't ask, don't tell type of thing, is that everybody was just like saying, Rita's doing really well. Where's she getting all this money? It's definitely not from show horses. Oh, well, I'm not going to investigate further. And so their brother still got a ranch, which is apparently pretty good. But yeah, the New York news organization showed up at the ranch and we're talking to him. So what do we think about? Oh, come on.
Your sister who wrote a letter to the judge that she was going to stay with you if she was released. Give me a favor and kiss my and
All right, that's yeah, that's Rita's brother, by the way, and yeah, quality individual. So yeah, um, I gotta honestly sympathize a little bit with Rita's brother because I'm just kind of like if I were Rita Cronwell's brother, I'm not sure what I'd do. On one hand, family, okay, just like just got nowhere else to turn after this. And so, yeah, I'd probably be defending my little sister as well. But on the other hand, I mean, come on. I mean, I think everybody is legit. He's probably just had these reporters just constantly flooding his property, and he's probably just going to say, okay, the only way that they're going to go away is if I'm kind of a jerk to them. Okay, so a little bit of sympathy for the brother, not a lot, but a little bit of sympathy for the brother. All right, so that's kind of my identification. I know it's a lot to go through, but any other observations or comments that you all came up with that you think were particularly interesting? What do you got, Andrew?
When they did an investigation of her house or her properties, they found boxes with files of what, like, she basically kept records
Mhm.
of the fraud she was committing.
So that's an interesting question. Why did Rita do that? It's like said basically, well, you gave us a paper trail to actually figure out what your fraud was. Was that something that happens in a lot of frauds? It actually happens quite frequently in frauds. Now, it's very interesting because presumably Rita knew the extent of the fraud because she kept such detailed records. But if you remember, they actually talked about the FBI investigation. She said, I only thought I stole how much money? What do you think she stole? $10 million. Okay. So she thought she stole a whole lot less, which basically says she kept track of it, but she wasn't really quantifying the extent of her fraud. Now, would a fraud perpetrator keep detailed records of that in that regard?
So that she knows what she might get in trouble for.
Yeah. So basically if you figure out, all right, this is what I've manipulated. If I don't know what I've manipulated, then I can't continue that manipulation in the future. As we all know in the financial statements, and we're not going to drill down too heavily in the financial statements, that we are going to drill down into financial details. In the financial statements, some of the financial statements roll forward from period to period. If you're committing a fraud on the balance sheet, what does that mean for the balance sheet in the future? You're going to have to manipulate that financial statement too. So self-perpetuating frauds are kind of necessitated by the fact that the financial statements are going to be misstated over periods of time. And so, yeah, that's something that you say, why did Rita do that? And the answer is pretty apparent when you're an accountant. So everybody watching this like, okay, that was just stupid. And the accountant's like, that's really smart. Okay. Yeah. So good observation. Good observation.
There was a part where they mentioned like $300,000 of income coming into Reed's account with no documentation, and the tax preparer was kind of just like, sure, that counts, and they have no documentation for any of it.
So yeah, for those of you who, there's gonna be a lot of you who are going to volunteer and provide. If you just saw $300,000 coming in, would you question that? What do you say, Jack? What do you say? What do you say, McKenna? Would you question that? It's an open-ended, Jack. I was asking either one. So yeah. Yes. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, that's a very interesting one where the tax preparer is just kind of like, well, I mean, she makes a lot of money. You know, if I were earning hundreds of $1,000s like her, I probably would lose track of that as well. It's kind of like an FTX type thing. It's like saying, all right, we got $50 million that just kind of shows up out of nowhere. Who knows? You know, yeah, we're not accountants. Yeah. Very, very weird. Very, very weird. What's up, Tyler?
So the city's total assets in 2011 were only 102 million. So it's like she stole half the town, pretty much.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, stealing half the town. It was over a 20-year period, but even then, it's just mind-boggling. They did buy for basis for comparison of the second largest municipal fraud, and that was I think $40 million. Now, what was interesting about that fraud with respect to this one?
Family.
Is it- It was a family in Washington, D.C., so a fairly large city. So it was a group of individuals in a big city that stole $40 million. And that was still massive. It wasn't one person who basically said, I'm taking everything. All right. Taking everything. Yeah. So yeah. Some interesting observations there. Anyone else? You got Andrew.
I also thought it was interesting how she, like, when they were talking about kind of the process of it, she very clearly like left hints, like she was trying to get caught. Like the biggest one that I kind of noticed was how she chose the name of the horses.
The horse names are amazing. Again, that's one of those things you're just kind of like, oh my gosh, there was like red flags in the horse names, you know? Yeah, yeah. So the only way that this would have even been more sweet is one of the horse names was actually red flag. Okay, yeah. Yeah. This is a red flag, yeah. So yeah, it's a horse name. So some of those horse names are amazing. Yeah, yeah. All right, so yeah, this is a good beginner. Now, like I said, this one is a little bit of an introduction. I wanted to get you acquainted. We're going to drill into a lot more detail on future fraud, so I will expect you to have a little bit more input and feedback on these. But I do think this is a good discussion. This is a very interesting case. I'm not going to go into like the ones that are going to be an hour and 20 minutes. We may do one or two of those this semester, but generally speaking, I'm going to try to keep these lower. I am not certain yet. I really enjoyed doing the videos for this, and I know that the case readings tend to take less time, but they tend to also be a lot more boring. So we'll probably try to go into about the 20 to 40 minute range for the videos. I'm going to see what happens. So that's my goal here. Again, encourage you to not just stay with the videos. The videos are fascinating, and this one is particularly well done. Some of them are going to be less well produced, and so I encourage you to look beyond just that and kind of look into it. One thing I'm going to mention here, you'll notice I pulled up Wikipedia, and some of you have strong feelings about Wikipedia, especially if you've done a research course before. They say can't use Wikipedia as a source. I think Wikipedia is a good frame of reference for just random details. You do have to take it with a grain of salt because some of the information is incorrect. Like a little bit or a little bit below, they talk about the corroboration and commuting of the sentence. So the sentence was not commuted until the 20 or was commuted in 2021, which commuting basically in this context means that it was changed from being actual imprisonment to home imprisonment. And then she was pardoned, completely pardoned on 12th, 2024. So yeah, just like AI tools, be very, very careful, use the Wikipedia tools for any references. But I do think that those are going to be good resources, and you'll find out a lot of interesting things that you can't find out in the videos themselves. All right, let's prepare for a quiz. If let's see, stop recording.